I'm Tereasa Wilhelmsen, Assistant State Engineer in our Applications and Records section. I'll start the presentation and the training. We do want it to be like a workshop, so if there's questions, please ask as we're going along. If I mention a term that is a buzzword you just don't get or don't understand, stop me and ask what that is. Then we'll take a break and we'll hear from Eric Jones. He is the Assistant Regional Engineer out of our Utah Lake Jordan River office. He should be arriving shortly. He had to get some kids places, so he'll be flying in a minute. And then we are going to have Jim Rees, who was down here. He'll be coming down, and he is going to demonstrate some pretty cool tools that we have on our database that you can actually use to help you as you're doing your work with water rights. And one actually was suggested by Lee Sim, and we have it. Yeah, we have an amazing guy named David Jones, who, not the singer or performer, but he pulled something together, and so Jim is actually going to demonstrate that this afternoon. So, and it has to do with groups that we're talking about. So the training today is really going to focus on a topic that for some reason we have a really hard time getting public folks and professionals to understand. And believe it or not, it's supplemental water rights. And I think those of us that work in water rights sometimes are a little stunned that it's not that understandable, but we spend, many hours every week working with our records and researching them and trying to get them available to the public. So I think it is a little bit easier topic for us, but we're hoping to help you guys understand a little bit what we see in our records. And just to kind of start, so I think the difficult part about water rights is, like we started with books like this, and we still have books like this in our office, that when an application came in, it actually was handwritten in each of these books. So we've done an effort over the last ages of computers to enter this type of information into the database that you guys now see as part of the public view that we do. We had a crew of gals that were hired. I won't say the vintage of their age because one of them is in this room, I think. But they were hired to come in and enter into our database when we first had it, all of these records, and go through the applications and input them. And Dana Dredge was one of them, those folks that was hired to do that. Okay, we'll say you started at 10. 10 p.m.? Okay. And it's kind of funny, we had an an elderly programmer that retired. His name was Alan Rowe. We love Alan. He came up with the colors we have on our database. But he actually used to refer to these gals as the night ladies. And so, right, Dana, you're a night lady?
Not anymore, I changed profession.
Okay. She actually does our title with Sue there. But each of these documents that we have, this is an old Sevier River decree, Bacon's Bible, and this was a document that got put in a binder, and we gave water right numbers to each of these entries within the decree, and then we had to go through these documents and enter them into our database. So you can kind of understand a little bit of the challenge that we have with trying to capture all of these, and this is just like a fraction of our display. This is an old Weber River decree map. I believe it's an original set, right, John? That we have here in our office. We now have these scanned so that they're available from our mapping tool, and Jim Rees is going to demonstrate that. But when I first started with the division, we had to go pull these out of our map drawers to use them. And you can see just the irrigated acreage that is identified in each of these maps. And so our challenge has been taking this information and trying to enter it into a very simplified database. And I'm hoping with what I'll present today that it'll give you just a little bit of understanding of what we're trying to display. And always keep in mind, no matter what we display on WR print, that's what we call the page, there's documents that support that. And the official information for a water right is the document. So we always have this disclaimer on our WR print page that use it with caution and make sure you find the documents that explain the story that you need. And we learned that the hard way. And in fact, I don't think I even pick up an order of the state engineer without looking at those documents that are in the file that we have. So just to kind of give you just a starting point of what we're trying to convey to you guys. And if you have any questions along the way, let me know. I'm going to start this with just a very simple example of what a supplemental water right is. And then I'm hoping to get you an understanding of a water use group. And one of the quiz questions I asked, when somebody says water use group to you, it could be a co-op of farmers, right? But it is a term that we use here in the division and that is displayed on our database that I'm hoping that I can help you understand what that's trying to capture regarding a water right. So this very basic example, it's kind of ironic. I created this like 10 years ago. Time flies. And I still had it. So this was just trying to represent those 3 red dots there are 3 points of diversion. One is a well that you see up here by this barn or home. There's a well there. There's a spring over here. And then there is a small creek that there's another head gate with a point of diversion. So we have 3 points of diversion on this area of land. So I just called this one water right number 1. It's an underground water claim, and UWGC is the acronym we use for that. And I actually have it on one of your handouts that will kind of cover a little bit too. But it's an underground water claim with a priority date of 1912. So groundwater rights needed to be of record prior to 1935. So these folks filed an underground water claim to say that they had been using that well since 1912. So that's one of our water rights. The next one is a decree. It's off of a small Weber River, I don't know, some creek, that there's a decree. That's water right number 2, and that is used by the same folks with this property. Then we have water right number 3, which is a diligence claim. A diligence claim is a claim to surface waters that were being used prior to 1903. And the folks called what's called a diligence claim in our office to make that of record. So as you can see, these 3 water rights came onto our record most likely at different times. And at one time, we probably had water right number 2 in this book. We probably had the underground claim maybe in this book. And maybe we had the diligence right in another book. And so our challenge was to try and bring those together so that everybody can see them. So what we've done over time, and this is actually the water use groups, is a brainchild of Boyd Clayton. He's our deputy state engineer. When he was in our technical services section, his challenge was to try to display these unique water use groups that would bring the water rights that were sitting independently in our office together so that we could see that supplemental relationship. So for example, we have this map delineated for the decree. It called out that description of land that decree was watering, okay? It was 30 acres. Then we had the underground water claim that was actually had called out on that document that purple description. And you quickly see those 2 overlap for at least half of it. And it called out on that water user's claim, or that underground claim, 55 acres. But that 55 includes that 30. Then we had a description that's called out by that diligence claim, which were those two 40-acre tracts down below from that spring. And you see that overlaps, and that was 15 acres that it called out on that diligence claim, and it included a map for that orange area. Well, you can quickly see when we started bringing these together on our database, we've got some stacking of these water rights, and you can't really stack them, so they become supplemental, and that's the supplemental nature of a water right. So the total acres is 45 for these water rights, 45 acres. It's not 100 acres. So if someone is looking at a water right or acquiring or filing a change, let's say that somebody wanted to file a change on the diligence claim that had been filed, they would not be able to file on that change 15 acres times a duty of 4 acre-feet per acre and move that somewhere else because you're supplemental to 2 other water rights. So that 4 acre-foot duty is shared somehow between all 3 of those water rights. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because we get a lot of change applications that are presented to us where we get just the diligence right for the full 4 acre-feet per acre for the full 15 acres. And yes, Mark, we're going to have you ask, since we've got the outside regionals, if you guys don't mind when you ask a question.
So just because it was stacked, that means that it becomes supplemental. If there wasn't an overlap there, then it could stand on its own. Is that
Sure.
the reason?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Lee, let's wait for the mic if you don't mind. It's Chris is right here. Sorry, he's going to get some exercise today.
But Teresa, there is a possibility that they could decide that that 15 acres was the sole supply,
Correct.
and these other water rights just help supplement it without adding any sole supply to that group. Isn't that right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And Eric, the second part of this presentation, Eric's going to talk about who just walked in, and his kids are in the right places, right? Yes. And he looks all put together. Better than me, Eric. So, yes, you can. And Eric's going to talk about declarations and how you might determine that. One of the things to keep in mind, though, Lee, too, is if you're that person, that diligence claim, maybe that priority of that diligence claim was 1902, maybe the decree was 1870. So when you determine that sole supply of those water rights, that priority date may come into play. Does that make sense? So great to add that. Thanks, Lee. So this is just a very simple example. I tried to make it as simple as possible. When we do these groups on our database, it's not always this easy. Sometimes that underground claim will call out 640 acres, but yet really it's only possible for that source to have provided the water to a small portion of that. But our database still has to reflect what that legal document said, that actual claim. And so in title, and I'm sure Jeff has dealt with this quite often, when he updates title to some of those things, he has to try and clarify and work with Sue and Dana to determine how that title is going to transfer by an impertinence. So just some terms to remember through this training. Are you falling asleep over there, Ross? Okay. Okay. So some terms to remember that I'm hoping that this training, when you walk out of here, that you'll understand. So supplemental rights, that little sample example is what I was trying to portray there, is that there are supplemental rights, because I also know several folks are acquiring water rights that you bring into your districts or into your cities. And it's very important for you to understand that relationship with those water rights. Understand that they're independent filings, and that even today, we don't have all of those supplemental relationships identified in our database. So be careful when you're looking at water rights that you're doing a complete search of that land, and we'll show you that tool that you can use, and look at those maps. Look to see if you have an overlap. The next example I'm going to bring up is one that were some more independent filings. And to be honest, we didn't even find the supplemental relationship till 3 years ago when somebody tried to file a change application on both and move them. The other terms to become familiar with are water use group. That is a database term, okay, that we use here, and I'm hoping to show you what that is. Beneficial use amount, that's another database term that we use, and I'm going to show you our database specifically where these fields are and how we use them and how we fill them in. Group total, another database term that is crucial to understanding what a water right is. Sole supply, that is different than beneficial use amount. So hopefully with this training you'll understand what sole supply amount is. And by the time we're done, if you don't understand some of these, let's clarify and make sure. And then understand also, our database is very dynamic. I can go back to my office today, work on something, and the data that you saw this morning may be changed because we found another book or another map that created some sort of relationship or an error that we had to correct. So it is always changing. We do have a tool coming online internally that we will be able to tell exactly if a staff member changed something, exactly what field they changed and when they changed it and what they changed it from. And so it's really important for us to be able to capture this information because we know that it's so live to all of you. So this next example, I'm curious how many people here do proofs of beneficial use. We've got John does proofs of beneficial use. And he does. So we have a few folks that are doing proofs of beneficial use. This is a prime example of what to look for if you're doing a proof of beneficial use and looking for what are you trying to prove up on that this person who's hired you to do this proof, what are you doing? This map is an old diligence claim map that's on our records. It's actually on that type of paper in the file. But you'll notice here, this says southeast corner of section 25, that it's identified there. And it's delineated railroad, and then here's where it was irrigating, and here's where it was irrigating, head gate coming off of there. Pretty detailed. This is only one sheet of many sheets for this diligence claim, but I'm just using this as the example that if you're a proof engineer and this person down here, let me make sure it's the right, yep. This person owns this property, has called you up and said, I have a well that my application is due for proof. Can you come out and survey this and file a proof of beneficial use for me? So you come out and you have now this application to appropriate. You'd have to be really old to do this one because it's very old. But you would want to see on our database or do the research as you're doing that new proof, this proof for this application, that this person is telling you, it looks like they're irrigating this same land with that well as was identified somewhat on that diligence claim. So when you do that proof of beneficial use, you want to recognize that and indicate if that well, and you're filing a proof right here, that you already have another water right. That I think this is for a drain or a spring or something, but there's already a water right there covering that land. Huh? It's Ovard Slough. Pleasant Grove here, anyone? So, and this is one that we actually, the city filed a change application on both of these, trying to do 4 acre-feet per acre on both. We can't do that because it's the same land. You know, what land are they going to take out of production if they're going to change those? So be careful when you're doing a proof that you're watching for this supplemental nature of things. And this was an extreme simple example, and I'm not giving you the whole story to both of these water rights, but I just wanted to demonstrate that there are maps on our records that may already cover that land as you're doing those proofs. So be careful when you're doing it. So overall, supplemental water rights are just water rights that are used together. This is a quick little graphic that we tried to create to demonstrate 3 different water rights and how those 3 different water rights could actually create 4 different groups depending on how those are used. And I'm not going to really break this down on this example because I think we could do a little bit better job of trying to explain this. And so I tried to really simplify it with that first example. So with that, what I want to switch to really quick is that quiz that I had you guys take, or most folks take. So if you want to do it real quick, you can, or you can just listen in. And I am going to give you the quiz to go with the answers underlined, but you get that as you leave. So, because I really do intend for this quiz to help you learn. It's not trying to trick people, although Lee told me there's a trick question. There wasn't intended to be a trick question, so we'll figure out which one that is. So, supplemental water rights. Okay, based on that first example that I gave you, supplemental water rights are rights that are used on the same place of use, right? That's what it makes the supplemental nature. They're used for common beneficial use. So in that first example I gave you, it was all irrigation. That's what makes it a supplemental water right. What if the underground water claim was just stock watering and the other 2 were just irrigation? The stock are not supplemental to the irrigation. So those would be in 2 separate use groups. So they're not supplemental to each other. May have different points of diversion. We demonstrated that with that example. 3 points of diversion, same place of use, same uses. That's what makes it a supplemental water right. So hopefully all but one of you selected all of the above. And I won't say who the one was. We had to have an outlier, so someone volunteered to do that. Okay, so a water right database water use group. And I just really want to emphasize that. That sounds like a whole big long word. But it's a database, our database, and the term is water use group. That actually is a term that I'll show you on our database. And it's something we made to refer to water rights and the supplemental nature and the uses of these water rights. And it was the brainchild of Boyd that I explained earlier of how we created these. So a water use group is a group of irrigation companies irrigating corn. Could be, but not in this section, not in this training, it's not. A way to represent one or more water rights in the records of the state engineer that are being applied to a common beneficial use. And that's true. That is actually a definition that you'll find in our rule on declarations and apportionments. And so it really is just a way in our database to represent these water rights. So I kind of joked just a little bit with a couple of these others. A group of water users that divert from the same point on a river. So if you go back to that example that I showed earlier, you had that point from the river. There could be 2 users using that head gate, but one user is diverting off to the west, where the other user is diverting off to the east. So the supplemental is happening over to the east. It's not happening. That west water right is not in the same group, even though it's from the same point of diversion. Does that make sense? So they could have various use groups, but all be using the same point of diversion. The next one is a group of water rights owned by the same person. Water use groups are not set up by ownership. You could have various owners in the same group. And a lot of that happens with the buying and selling of water rights. For cities, you'll see like American Fork. I'm going to use when I know Jeff works with American Fork City quite often. They will have one primary use group that has all of their perfected city water rights in that group. One thing to note is if American Fork has pending change applications where they've acquired these various rights and have filed a change and it's been approved to municipal for the city, those are not put in the group with the other perfected water rights until those changes are perfected. So they will be in a separate use group, probably with those other irrigation rights that it was supplemental with, or the stock rights. So keep in mind this dynamic relationship of water rights, that they don't necessarily become the official use group, or that use group represents the perfected documents, not approvals of documents. And there are some exceptions, right? Always with water rights. So, so the water rights owned by the same person, we do not create these groups based on ownership. It's based on use. So the next question, so the beneficial use of the water right is the purpose to which water diverted under water right is applied and the amount of that beneficial use. That is true. So beneficial use is the limit and measure of a water right. So very simple. I think that was, I threw you guys a bone on that one, I hope. But it is. It's basically what that water right is authorized to do, and it's the limit of that water right. I'm going to point out, don't confuse beneficial use with beneficial use amounts. Those are two separate terms. And beneficial use amounts, if you remember, is a database term. Next question. Oh, this was a little more diverse. The beneficial use amount of a water right is, and so the question up above there was beneficial use. This is the beneficial use amount. So the beneficial use amount, the amount of beneficial use a water right contributes to a water use group that includes the subject water right. That's a whole big mouthful of a definition there. But I'm hoping when I demonstrate to you on the database that field, it's going to really bring it in to perspective. And I can revisit this question if we need to kind of help with that definition. So it's a database term. The other answers that I have on here, the number of water rights contained within a use group. No, it's not dependent on the number of water rights. It's dependent on the beneficial use of that water right in that group, specific to a group. Seasonal period in which a water right is used. A water use group does have a period of use on each of those, but it doesn't define necessarily the beneficial use amount. And then a sole supply of a water right. This is a really good term. Understand, and hopefully after this training, you'll understand that beneficial use amount is not always the sole supply of a water right. Okay? Lee?
But it can be.
Yes, it can be if there's only one group. Or maybe there's two and one's an auxiliary. Something like that. So, oh, we didn't wait for the mic. Yeah, I know. Chris signaled me. Sorry, guys, for those that are going to listen in later. Okay, next question. This is a long one. I tried to simplify it, but so a water right is included in two database groups, okay? So I have two groups on this water right. The first water use group has two water rights in it because they're supplemental. The second group has 5 other supplemental water rights in it. So the defined beneficial use amount for this water right, this particular water right in the question, in this group over here, it says it's for the irrigation of 10 acres with a group total of 50 acres. So in that statement, 10 acres is the beneficial use amount for the water right of a group total of 50. Okay? So if it was the only group that this water right was in, the sole supply of that water right would be 10 acres. So maybe that orange down on the bottom of that first example was a sole supply of 10 of a total of 50. So that's in this group. So then the defined beneficial use amount in this other, so now we have the second group in here with the 5. Let's say that they declared that they have a 0 beneficial use amount in this group, and it was a total of 80 acres over here that it was irrigating. So the sole supply of this water right is what? Anyone? Jeff? 10, right? Okay, did you guys follow that? Because the water right had a beneficial use amount in this first group of 10 acres of 50. It had 0 over here. So its sole supply, when you add those beneficial use amounts together, 10. So if you buy a water right and you come in here and file a change application on that one water right for 50 acres and 80 acres, what are we going to be able to approve that application for? Claudia, wait for the mic. Sorry. Don't forget your question.
Well, it's not a question, it's just confirming what Lee just said, right? Where
Yes.
you have a beneficial use amount and a sole supply that are the same.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, in this particular case. Most people don't usually claim 0 in a beneficial use group, but we do have it happen. But this is just trying to emphasize when you are looking at water rights or you're helping people with their water rights, understand what these beneficial use amounts are, what the supplemental nature is, because when you file that change application that comes before us, it could really slow it down, or if all of this is completely clear, it'll really speed it up, because we know what the limits of this water right are. So we'll come back to this a little bit. So this last one, a water right holder may request in writing to the state engineer a review of the state engineer's water right database entries and the state engineer's water right files related to a water use group. So let's say, I'll finish the sentence there. The request shall include how the submitter believes the record should be modified to be consistent with the state engineer's files. The answer to that is true, and Eric's presentation for the second half of this training is really going to cover that rule that this comes directly from. And so let's say that, I don't know, Danny or Emily or Van or anybody's helping a user, a water user, and they come to you and say, here's my farm, I have this 50 acres, I have this source and this source, oh, and I have this well over here, and you're helping them try and determine what their water rights are. And you looked on our database, and we show a relationship between those 2 water rights, but this well is just sitting out there independently, not shown being used there. I think your first question to your client is, what is this well? And okay, yeah, you are using it over here. Yeah, I see the map. It's showing that it's supposed to be there. So you would submit to us a request that says, hey, will you take a look at this group? We do have these 3 water rights that are being used together. We're trying to update title, or we're trying to file a change or do something with this, clarify this. But you also, with that request, need to tell us why you think that is. So refer us back to our own map that's on our database, or something that will help us then know what you're looking at in that record. And this happens quite often. And the sooner you recognize these errors on the database before you get down, the rabbit hole of, trying to update title or file a change application, the sooner you recognize that there's an error in our database, the easier that process is going to go to file that change or do that proof or get that certificate issued. Make sure that all the points in our database are entered correctly. Rediversion points, everything. Sometimes those are missing. And so you representing your clients or who you work for, your companies, that our database is correct, because we are missing some stuff from it. And we will completely admit that. And also, as far as these use groups go, the database was changed so that the format can try to show these relationships. And Boyd can correct me just a little bit here. What they did, so Boyd developed the fields and the structure for that, and then the computer, with a couple staff members, went through and tried to pull those relationships together and recognize those relationships. We have done some QC on some of these, but not everything. And so there could be a supplemental relationship that got pulled together by the database when that ran, that maybe not a true supplemental relationship. So just be aware that we had the night ladies out entering their records, the Danas and that whole group that were actually entering that data. But then some of these processes to pull all of these books together and these maps together were done by a computer. And so it only could do what it could do based on the information that we had entered. And if we had an error, it may not have recognized that relationship. And it was very hard on the maps. All we had to do, or all we could do, was use the place of use that was entered in the database, correct, Boyd? And then we have to really refer back to these individual maps to help us really tighten that use group a little bit tighter than what the computer could do. So keep that in mind as you're working through with these. So, and all of you got that right. True or false, right? Normally, if you're trying to learn something, you answer true. I don't know, in a quiz. So I'm going to jump over to just another little, and actually, I am going to don't forget to take a copy of the quiz that has the underlined answers. So I'm just going to pass this out real quick. Because the whole point was for you guys to know the answers to that quiz. Let's see. Oh. Okay. What I'm going to try and do with this next little presentation is actually, and sorry, I'm going to divert us for just a second. I want to break down and then I'll get back to that one. Okay, so this is our database. I'm going to use this to just kind of demonstrate a couple sections with this. And I gave you guys, there's a little handout that you have with some definitions on them that I'm going to point out some things that are critical to, yours isn't colored, but it's just a double-sided sheet that was sitting on the table. So this is our website. And this is actually where every single staff member that we have in the division goes to log in every day and do our work. We use exactly what you guys see, well, somewhat. We have a few fields that you guys don't see. So, but this is our database. I just want to make sure I'm not logged in here so I see it the same way you guys do for this demonstration. So you can do searches. Jim is going to do a lot more detailed introduction and some of the tools. But what I'm going to do is just bring up a water right here and just talk to you about this page that you guys all see. This is kind of your resource to water rights, right? I think all of you have used this page, or at least hopefully you have. We call this the WR print page, and what I'm going to show you today in breaking down these sections, I think in a few months is going to drastically change. But we're actually redesigning this page and making it more modern. It will still contain the same information, but it's going to look a little bit different. So when in a few months you get to this and you're like, what did these guys do? We are redesigning or reprogramming this page. So we're all going to have a learning curve in a few months here. So the first thing, just to point out, all of you should know this little drop down here. You can get to every single scanned document that's on that file through this link. And it's an extremely helpful tool. We have the luxury, we can go to a file room, grab that file, and we have all of the documents color-coded and everything for us to use. Unfortunately, you guys just get black and white in most cases. But I would never do work on a water right without checking out these documents, right? I think you do that. Or file something in court, right, Danny? You make sure you know what these documents are. So So some of the fields that we've tried to capture with this WR print, I can actually, without looking at the documents, so I will go to WR print, I will skim this page, and I can pick out history of that water right just from some of these fields that are in here. And I'll try and explain some of those to you. Then to fill in the blanks, obviously go get the file. So water right number. Really what that water right number represents, it's just a file jacket, okay, in our database. Just because you have a water right number may not mean you have a water right. You have a file in our office that has something in it. How those numbers came about, those first two numbers represent an area code. This tells me this is the 51 area is within the Utah Lake Jordan River area office. If you're in the Logan area, it would have like a 29, 25, 23. Uinta Basin, a 43. So this helps us identify the area where that water right file jacket pertains. Then it's always followed by a hyphen and another number. Those other numbers are just assigned sequentially from the database. One example that we did, and this is just to kind of point out a couple things to be aware of. So this particular book, it's not really that old. It was done in 1985, the year my son was born. And it is the Provo River Decree. And this is the original book when one of our staff members was given the assignment to give a file jacket number to every decree entry in that Provo River Decree. They took a pen and wrote them next to each of those entries, all through this decree. And then the night ladies then took this and entered it into our database and created that file jacket. This effort to do these decrees, a lot of times you'll see the sequential numbering is slightly off from some application processing because we would reserve like a block of numbers because we knew we needed to use them to do a decree. And so then the staff member doing that would use that block of numbers. So sometimes these decrees aren't necessarily numbered sequentially in our database. Another, just a tidbit to be aware of, there was a time, we don't do it now, but there was a time when a change application that was filed with our office got a file jacket over here with a small a attached to it and no water right number like what you guys deal with today. So it would sit in a section of the file room in a small a section where everything else had an area code and a file number. We did an effort to give all of those change applications file numbers so that they would all have a water right file jacket number. The tricky part to be aware of is sometimes that change application was filed obviously prior to 85, like for the Provo River Decree, when those file jacket numbers were made. So when we did that effort to renumber those change application numbers, it may be sitting in a change file jacket over here and the decree sitting over here. So you have to be really careful when you deal with old change applications that happened to look in that right evidence by of that change. And if it says Morse Decree of the Provo River, go find the rest of your file that's sitting in a different file jacket. That trips a lot of people up. Sometimes people will also try and file new changes on both of those, but it's really the same core document that established that water right. So be careful with that. There was not intentionally done. It's just kind of vintage through, and staff members, different staff members doing it. But all of the decrees, we've done an effort to do that. Not all of them, though, however, have file jacket numbers even today. Mill Creek, here right in Salt Lake City, doesn't have all of that effort done. So we don't have file jackets for every single entry in Mill Creek. Spanish Fork River, for those of you that know how large that decree is and how much water that affects, We just did that effort 5 years ago, Kevin, 6 years ago, that we gave water right numbers to the Spanish Fork River Decree. So we're working through them. So when you pull up WR print or you do a search by a source or something, if it doesn't come up and you think there really is something out there could be a decree out there that's in a whole nother book that's up in our office that we need to get a number to. So anyway, enough on water right file numbers. So the next little key here is this application claim number. This gives me a piece of history when I look at this WR print. And I did on your handout, that little second section, I tried to list what some of those letters are that are attached to our files or our applications so that you know what they are. Like a capital A in this field means it was an application to appropriate, and so on down that list. And this is really hoping to help you understand what some of these letters mean. This particular one I can tell is an underground water claim because of that capital U. So as I'm skimming through this water right, I immediately know I'm dealing with an underground claim that may or may not have a complete story to it. So you have to pay more attention to it. So this application claim number becomes very important. The ownership, this happens to be the ownership shown on our records for this particular water right as of today. This next section gives you some important dates to be aware of. When that application was filed, the priority date of that water right is listed there. And when you're dealing with declarations and supplemental water rights, priority dates matter. They really do. This next section, and I did put on here just a brief summary of that next section. This gives me a really good history as to what has happened with this water right. So type of right, that is a field that we use to represent what is this type of right. Was it an underground claim? Was it a decree? Was it an application to appropriate? What type of right do we have here? And I don't know, how many of you use this field to help you with your clients? Danny, you use it? You guys do? That it gives you that piece of information to understand what you're looking at with this water right. And if you see underground claim there, right, then under scan documents, you're going to go look for a claim, one of those big legal size claims that's there. The next one is source of information. This one represents the source of the information that we're showing you here. So in this summary, the source of this information is that underground water claim. Now, let's say that this particular underground claim had a change application filed on it that got approved, a proof got filed, and a certificate issued. That source of information would then say certificate, because that is the source of information. And you can kind of see that chronological dynamic chain of events that happen with these water rights through that. Status, that actually gives you the status of the water right. Approved, rejected, withdrawn. List of unclaimed rights, I think, is on there now for our adjudication that is happening. If the status is blank, that usually is like a decree. So you would maybe see source of info and type of right say decree, because decrees don't really have a status, they're decreed. And actually, I am going to also point out priority date. Sometimes you'll run into a blank priority date, and where that's most common is on the Provo River, because those rights were distributed by class. They weren't assigned a priority date, so we didn't capture that. So you'll see that listed blank. But then as you come down under other comments, you'll actually see that decree entry that it refers you to. So if you see a blank priority date, don't necessarily think it's an error. It could be intentional, but most cases we should have a priority date in there. So pay attention to type of right, source of information, and status. When I did this little handout, I actually realized I don't think we have anywhere publicly what all of these options are or what they mean. And that might be something I can add to Clark's to-do list. Okay. My to-do list, I don't know. I think Clark's listening. Hopefully he's awake. Ha ha, Clark. So the next section of this water right, or this WR print, you can actually go to map view. Jim will show you that later. Another key component is flow. Every water right should have some sort of flow, and it's typically represented in cubic feet per second or acre feet. If you see a blank flow, you probably don't have a water right because it's blank. So you'll want to investigate to try and figure out, why don't you have a flow? And what happens a lot of times is if we renumber a water right, because the change moved it somewhere else, we will actually put in a blank flow so that somebody doesn't think there's something over here. But we don't delete these off our database. We can't. They're history. So we retain that. Sometimes you might see another case where somebody sold more water than they had, and that becomes a negative or a zero. And it may look like there's still some water there, but there's a problem. So if you see that and it looks like all of that water is gone, that would probably be a major red flag that I would investigate. And that does happen. So just pay attention to that flow. The next sections just show you the source, the point of diversion. Then this next section that I'm going to really focus on is the water use, the uses of a water right. Okay? So I'm going to break this one down just a little bit. When I talked water use group, there's your water use group and a number. Okay? So that's a database term that we actually did in our database. So you can see this water right is part of this group, 228167. But there's a second group, water use group 635382. So it is actually part of 2 water use groups. And that's a database water use group. So you know you've got 2 supplemental things going on here because it's got 2 groups. This particular one, there's these 4 water rights. They provide for stock watering, domestic. There's that beneficial use amount term that I explained. It's a database group. It's not just a beneficial use. It's a beneficial use amount, and it means something to us. Beneficial use would be stock watering and domestic irrigation. But a beneficial use amount tells us that this water right in this group provides for 67.8 animal units of a group total of 113. So if somebody wanted to file a change application and they had ownership to this water right, they couldn't file for 113 animal units. They only have a sole supply or a beneficial use amount, beneficial use amount of 67.8. So these terms are really trying to capture the beneficial use amount of this water right in this group of a group total of 113. And in the perfect world that sometimes water rights has, we try, if you looked at all 4 of these water rights, they would total 113. That's where we try to get, but sometimes they don't. So, but it should. So each of these 4 have a piece of that 113. So you can just break it down. Domestic, this particular water right provides for 3 of the domestic units of the total of 5 that is supplemental here. The second group then, it's irrigation. And it is 3 different water rights that are providing for that irrigation. So if you think back to that example that I first showed you with the yellow, purple, and orange, that overlap of that irrigation could be represented within this group, but then maybe we have some cows wandering around that pasture. That's not the same beneficial use, so it's in a different group. And the homes may be on that same property, but it's not the same beneficial use, so it's in a different group. Except there could be a time when all of those water rights do provide for all of those uses. So you could see them all in the same group. But in this particular case, it's different water rights providing for the irrigation and different water rights that are providing for the domestic and stock. Okay? Is that a little too small, Mark? Sorry. John?
In regards to the group that you have up there, if you click on one of those water rights, will the
Oh.
same water use group number come up for that right? And will the exact same water rights be shown on that group under the other water right entries?
Sorry, why don't you go ahead and ask one more time?
Okay, for the water right group number that you have shown there, you have 3 water rights on there, correct? I can only see part of the screen, so. But if you click on one of those water rights, and you're going back to a different water right in the water use group, will it show the exact same water rights in that as you're showing in that group, or will these water rights potentially be associated with other groups?
Yes. So what John is trying to explain, so this particular group here has these 3 water rights. We are looking at this one here, but you might click on this and go to 8560, and it could be a part of 5 other groups. Right? That's what you're trying to explain there?
I'm not trying to explain, I'm just asking a question.
Okay. So it could. So when you click on these hyperlinks, you should see on each of these 3 this group with this number, but they could also have other groups with them, because they could be supplementing something else that this one is not doing. Boyd.
As a clarification, I think the reason John is asking this question is prior to the database change that we made in about 2000 sometime, we used to have supplemental groups, but they were not connected to the other water rights. They were all independent entries. So a supplemental group may have shown on one water right, but not on the other. And that's actually what happened when we made this change. It wasn't that the database did anything magic. What it did was went and looked at all the water use groups that showed another water right in the same group and tried to combine those groups so we had the same entry in both places.
Yeah. So to try and summarize Boyd and John here, the supplemental groups that we had obviously we had a database prior to creating the water use groups. Each of those may have been stored independently, like I mentioned in the beginning.
Were stored independently.
They were stored independently. Sometimes they had a supplement.
Well, they always had, they may have had the same group, but they were independent groups. You could delete one and the other one would remain.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to try and summarize that. So they were independent in the database. Okay. So then when we combined these into one group and created this water use group, it then created the supplemental nature. But they were always supplemental. They just maybe had different entries in the database. So when this effort came together to create this relationship, in some cases, it could have also left that original group, which is a duplicate of a portion of this combined group. So if you're helping folks through this, I don't know if you guys can see this, if you see 2 groups and this other group looks like it actually is part of this, it could be. And it's just a duplicate group that we need to get out of our database. And we're still trying to recognize a lot of those with it. Is that what you're summarizing there, Boyd? Okay. So be aware that you may have 2 groups, this one 0.833 acres, and then you may see this water right below it in another group by itself for 0.833 acres. that should throw a flag to you. I probably got 2 duplicate groups because it's probably just 1.833 acres, right? We would hope. Sometimes they're a little more hidden than that because it might be 10 and 10. It becomes more difficult. Chris Boyd has.
What often created these duplicate groups was someone made an entry error, and on one of the water rights, they would show 5 water rights in the group, and on the other entry, they would show 4 water rights in the group. And so when the database tried to combine that, then it recognized those as different groups, and so it created 2 groups instead of 1.
Yeah. And just maybe so when we would do proposed determination books in the past, which was part of the adjudication, we would create a paper typed by a typewriter, maybe a computer, but somebody, an adjudicator, would be adjudicating this water right over here, recognize that supplemental of the other 4, type that entry into the book with the 4 water rights listed. An adjudicator over here maybe had one of those for some reason, typed an entry down here with only the 1 water right, not representing the 4. So what happened, those combined, it had a difficult time trying to figure out that those were the same. So human error, a lot of cases, different perspectives or different eyes on the thing. So, and I kind of with following up on John's just a little bit. So if I was editing the database and I delete this group, I delete from all 3. I don't delete just from the one that I'm in. Staff members learn this the hard way. I learned this the hard way. If you delete a group, it comes out of every water right. So the option that you want to use if you're removing a water right from a group is remove the water right. Don't delete the group because it will delete it from every single water right. And then the water users might not be too happy about that. So anything else, Boyd? Okay. So yes.
Thanks. Just wanted to make sure I understood the difference between sole supply and beneficial use amount real quick.
Sure. This is actually a great example to use.
So on this one, each beneficial use amount would also be the sole supply amount because there's not the same beneficial use in each group. So there's not I guess for example, there's not a stock watering in group 1 and group 2. And so I was thinking that the sole supply amount would also be 67.8 because there's not 2 to add
Right.
together.
In this particular case, yes. Do you guys follow that for over this side? Let me walk over here. So what he's basically saying, so this particular water right, the beneficial use amount is 3 domestics. I'm going to use the domestics because that's how tall I am over here.
Okay.
3 domestics. So you could say in this particular case that the sole supply for this water right, the domestic sole supply for this water right is 3 because there is not another group to add it to. But if you had a second, like say irrigation group, this was in a half acre or beneficial use amount, and it had a second group that had another acre, the sole supply would be, were you listening?
Yeah, 1.5.
Yes, 1.5. Did you follow that? Those are key terms to understand. Beneficial use amount versus sole supply. And I slip on that a lot in using that term. So,
Thanks.
okay. So just really quickly, the use groups are really the key to kind of helping you understand. These groups get created by us a lot of times too. In a region office, we may be trying to work on a project and have to end up creating each of these groups as we're doing that project to try and represent this whole variety of documents and pull them together, and then we will set up these groups. But majority were done in that larger effort. Just a couple other pieces of this WR print that is valuable for you guys to use. comments. A lot of times you'll see some unique comments that relate to that water right, where we try and capture something that really people should be aware of. Sometimes the comments are a little weird, but we'll fix those when we get them or we find them. This next section covers when a water right is segregated. This is set up to where this first section typically represents what the water right originally was filed for. In some cases, that's not true because we have different staff that sometimes have interpreted this over different times through our database. But this usually would come from that original, like the underground water claim in this case. That information should be represented here. Then if somebody sells a piece of a water right, it actually gets a new number and gets entered, and those amounts are subtracted from the base and just on down that they get subtracted. So this just really helps you understand what the water right was, potentially what's been sold or moved or changed, and then what's left. I would be pretty careful with some of these because if a water right's been oversold or something maybe just isn't as accurate in our database, we do sometimes have to adjust these seg histories. But we really do use this. We also have a new tool now. I think it's called Chris Seg History Update or something, where if we issue a new certificate on a water right, like for example, this underground claim, it originally existed for these uses, but then it had a change application, we issue a certificate, we actually will then, once we issue that certificate, enter another entry here that starts a history again because that water right changed, but we're still trying to retain that old history in there. So this becomes very helpful for you. So really quickly here, a couple questions. Might start with Willis since you're right there.
I just had a comment because Sonia had a question, but when you do a segregation, that segregation, the new water right number becomes part of that original group until a change application is actually perfected.
I have an
So-
example here of that.
Okay, so that was
Yeah.
just what she was asking me, so I thought we should point that out.
Yep. Thank you, Willa.
This is just more of a comment. So if everything was done correctly, then the bottom line here is actually the sole supply for the water right.
Yes. And it should, like the flow and acre foot should match up here. So just kind of a double check. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to jump to that other presentation that I had open real quick. So hopefully that just kind of gave you, that WR print really should be your tool. Anytime I deal with a water right, I skim through that to get the highlights. And then I go into the file and find those documents to know what the heck we're doing with it. So, so this next little slideshow here, and I'm just going to spend a few minutes and then we'll take a break. This example again of the supplemental. So I just wanted to show you that these documents, just an example here, like this particular water right file that's up in our office has a certificate to appropriate on it. And I hope that your hand slides, I tried to get the detail here, but I didn't do a very good job. So I'll try and also point with the pointer here. So this particular water right has a certificate of appropriation. That tells me it was an application to appropriate, got developed, proof was filed, and we issued a certificate of beneficial use for it. That then became a defining document for this particular water right. You'll notice, so here's the WR print. On this certificate, you'll see a certificate number. You don't see the water right number because they didn't used to have them in this vintage of the certificate. But you'll see this application number, 21014, 21014. And that capital A means it was an application to appropriate. So this paper document is captured in here. owner SC NABM. So there's the ownership. So this certificate, nobody's even updated title on this old water right. Priority date, September 12th, 1949. Priority date, September 12th, 1949. So these gals that entered these documents basically took off of these paper documents and put it in the database to represent that information. Down below here, here's your type of right. It was an application to appropriate. The source of information is certificate because it was certificated, and the status is certificate because it's a certificated water right. So all of that is represented where we take these documents and try and put them in this database that all of you use. Here's another example that shows the group. So same certificate, and this is a very simple water right. So I just tried to make this a little bit bigger so you can read it. So the water is appropriated during period of January 1 to December 1, used for domestic purposes serving one family, and then used to irrigate 0.48 acre. So the certificate actually told us that that's what this water right was. So then when that use group was created, here's our water use group. There's the water use group number. There's the irrigation of the 0.48 from April to October. There's the domestic of one equivalent domestic unit is what that stands for, from January to December. And then it delineates the place of use where that is. So it actually took this old certificate and created that use group. And we did that thousands of times. Right, Wood? Thousands? Few thousand, yeah. So this is an extremely simple example of how those documents that were created over time get entered and create that use group that we have. So just another example. This is a different certificate. Hopefully what you're going to capture from this is the chronological order of how dynamic things are. And Scott knows that, right? So this is the certificate of appropriation. I didn't do a very good job at making this readable. I tried to say what the uses are. So this is actually out of this text here. I don't know which one's easier for you to read. I should have made it a lot bigger. But during the period from March 15th to October 15th, okay, to irrigate land, a total area of 151.75 acres. So that certificate was issued, I think in the 50s, to irrigate 151.75 acres. So our database shows this. So we have a use group. Boy, now there's a whole bunch of other water rights that are in this group saying it's supplemental. But on the certificate, there's no mention of supplemental back then. So then you look at it's used for irrigation. Beneficial use amount is the 151.75 that's on that certificate. But it's now in a group total of over 700 acres. So you kind of go, how did it get supplemental, and how did it did retain that sole supply that it had? So that's probably beneficial use amount or sole supply if it's not in another group, right? So then as you look at the documents that are on the file and the type of right or the source of data, those fields, you see that we have a water user's claim, signed water user's claim that was dated in the 70s, so it was issued after that certificate. It then got issued in the 70s, and we identified a supplemental relationship with this water right. And you'll kind of see over here, we've got a group total. This group total does match that total acreage being irrigated, so the place of use. So things changed with this water right, that it was originally independent, and then, you know, like Scott, when he used to work for us and did the adjudication, out tromping through those ditches and pastures, you'd find them and make them supplemental to each other. And then take a water user's claim, that water user would sign it, say, yeah, I'm using these supplementally, and we'd publish a PD book, proposed determination book.
So how come the 755?
Just ignore that.
That's what I was trying to reconcile is the 883 versus the 755. What's the? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. Nate, if you're listening in, this is one of your water rights. I could be a seg, it could be something else, I don't know, because it's kind of funny too that this place of use here, it does the 883.4 and the 883.4. So I'm not quite sure where that group total 740, 755. Just a second, Lee, we'll get the mic over to you. So that would throw a red flag, right? That we need to figure out what's going on with that.
Well, it used to be that when they were adjudicating and they were out identifying irrigated land, they would identify the entire place of irrigation, even if there wasn't enough water right to irrigate it. So in this case, it might be an area of 883 acres, but within that 883, the water right, the group of water rights is actually limited to 755 acres.
Yeah,
Is that right?
that could be, yeah, definitely. So, you know, all of these exceptions, right, that we're talking about, but that could be that the total area, and I happen to know this is where some pivots are, but that total area may encompass 883, but maybe they only run enough pivots to do 755.98 in any one season. So who knows? We'd have to really look into what's happening with this one. And Nate may have an answer. I don't know if Nate's on listening in or anything, but so this example was really trying to show you how dynamic things are. And, you know, even if, let's say, and this happens, a new diligence claim gets filed today in an area, we have to go investigate that diligence claim and look at all the other water rights, and we may see this other water right that is supplementing now with this diligence claim, and we have to create that relationship with that water right group to show that in our database. Or a certificate gets issued because a change was approved to create a supplemental issue or a supplemental relationship. When we issue that certificate, we create that water use group to make that supplemental relationship. So these next few examples, I just wanted to bring up what our database looks like so that you go, oh, what was that she showed us that one day? What did that mean? This is just an example that if the beneficial use amounts are defined, you can segregate to file a change application. So I'm just going to bring this up here. This particular example here is what Willa was demonstrating or explaining. So we had this original water right, it was a diligence claim, and they sold a portion of it because they had a defined beneficial use amount. They knew what the sole supply for this water right was. So we segregated it, and that segregated portion got a new water right number. But it stays, these two stay together, even though this may have an approved change filed on it. They stay together because they are still within a group total of that almost 15 acres. But when that's certificated, if that change gets certificated, you will actually see that pop out of the group going to its own group, and that group total then gets reduced to the beneficial use amount. So another dynamic relationship that happens there. Boyd, are you raising your hand back there?
Well, I was just going to clarify, if when you certificate the change, it's no longer supplemental,
Right.
it'll go in its own group.
Goes in its
It
own.
could stay in the same
Yeah.
group if the use remains in that group.
Okay, true. So if you see you're looking at a water right, trying to help somebody understand what they can file a change or what you're acquiring under a water right, if you see in this beneficial use amount the word unevaluated, that should throw you up a flag because we don't know what it is. And so you got a lot of work to do to figure out what that unevaluated is. If you're lucky, I don't know if it's lucky, the definition may be sitting in one of these documents and we can just enter it if you help us see where it's at. But in most cases, it will lead to what Eric's going to talk about when you have that unevaluated group. So another example, you may see this in the database. Water use group, you have irrigation. Here's the example of unevaluated. And then you see this little link down here. It says, in addition to the water rights in this group, water is provided to this place of use by North Jordan Irrigation Company. That is going to tell you or throw a flag to you, this is unevaluated. You don't know what this water right is worth standing on its own, but you have a hint here that there's probably some shares of stock on this ground too that's watering this land. So that's what that represents, is that this could be supplemental to North Jordan Irrigation Company. So that's supplemental. Scott.
I was just going to say, I mean, you're going to get into this with Eric, but that's where the declaration of beneficial use comes in. That's where the declaration of beneficial use will come in if needed. Is it'll go back to the water user, and then as a water user will need to make some determination of that.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
you've-
kind of a lead into what Eric, well, you had that up there.
Yeah, and you've probably helped quite a few people with that, right?
We have, yeah, it's pretty common
To do
to
that.
come up to changes and see that in there, so then we need to do the declaration.
Yeah. And it's not a lot of times an easy fix, right? So technology, right? I just got a text on my Fitbit on my phone from Clark Adams saying the acreage was crop rotation. So we got the answer. Okay, the next one, share statement. So share statements are a different type of water right file jacket, okay? It's not a water right. So how do you know when you have a share statement? A couple of the clues, type of right. Here we go, type of right, water company shares, okay? Source of info, share statement. So what these are is a company, an irrigation company, obviously issues shares of stock. Somebody wants to file a change application on their shares of stock, or maybe a non-use application. I think Jeff may have done some for some companies or entities. So what they do is they come into our office with those shares of stock, 10, 20, 200, however many, and we create a separate file jacket and create a share statement. That share statement represents all of the company's water rights, not just one water right in that company. It's because it's encompassed, that share is encompassed by several water rights of that company. So when we create that share statement, we have what's called a water company page set up. It will actually pull all of the elements of all of the water rights that that company has and create the share statement. It pulls in the source, and then it creates this use group. But you'll notice this use group is a little bit different than most use groups. Has a group number. There are no water rights numbers listed. And it just lists an acreage and then gives a statement of a place of use. So it's very simplified, very basic. But those are little clues to throw up for you that you're dealing with a share statement, not a water right. Or I should say, not a decree, not an underground claim, not a diligence claim. But you're dealing with something that is based on shares of stock in a company. And on the ownership, you should see the company and the shareholder. And they'll be identified in that ownership for the water right. So I have only had a couple more slides here. So the important things to understand, it is critical that you research the records to ensure that the documentation supports the database entries, okay? Look at the books, look at the files, look at the scanned documents. Make sure that what you have, don't just go off that database and advise a client what you're seeing there. Do your homework to make sure, and staff, make sure that what you're looking at, that we don't have an error in the database. The groups are dynamic. We talked about that, how they change over time with the things that are filed. And then the chronological order of occurrence. You could have an application to appropriate, then a certificate is issued on that application, then maybe a water user's claim and it was published in a PD book. So there's these events that happen throughout the history of that water right that could change that database. You know, maybe then there's an addendum to that PD. Then maybe there's a change application that gets filed on that water right, and then that gets certificated. So it's just constantly a change in a lot of water rights. And as professionals, I feel for you that I think that's the hardest part to try and track and understand. We work with it every day. You know, we can recognize this very easily off this list. But I think you guys digging in and coming and asking questions of the regional office or of our office here in Salt Lake, we're happy to sit down with you to kind of help understand that. So I did some field work out in Uinta Basin one time. Right, Scott? I don't know if you were with me on this one. So this actually was a road or a sign posted on one of the roads there. Slow, please, sheeps on road next 5 miles. And they had added a little S after sheeps. So I had to keep that. They also said something about trespassers will be shot. And so have that one somewhere. But the terms to remember from what I was trying to just convey to you guys today is the water use group. What that is, it's a database term, and now you know where in the database to find that. Beneficial use, right? Stock watering, domestic, power, various beneficial use. Beneficial use amounts is a database field again that helps represent what that water right contributes of that beneficial use amount for that group total. Okay, and sole supply. Hopefully did we clear what sole supply is? That it's not just a beneficial use amount. It could be the addition of those beneficial use amounts, right? So those are different terms. So those were the things I was hoping you guys would capture from this. So with that, I don't know if any of you have any questions. We were going to take a 15-minute break here real quick, and then Eric will resume. We're going to get started right at 10:45.